Video games are generally all about promoting player freedom and letting them do things they can't do in real life, because why the hell not? That said, there are of course limits to this. Developers don't always want you to have free reign to do everything, especially if it betrays their own vision for the story or gameplay, or makes the game something they didn't intend it to be. Some clever devs have nevertheless found ways to implement ingenious countermeasures to minimize that sort of behavior. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are 10 ways video games were forced to control players. Number 10. Introducing reverse friendly fire for griefers. Rainbow Six Siege. For several years after it launched, Rainbow Six Siege had a huge problem with griefers who were exploiting the game's friendly fire mechanics to troll their own teammates, either dishing up hefty damage or straight up killing their comrades. With no punishment system in place for these actions, trolls could easily make Siege a miserable experience for anyone on the receiving end of their buffoonery. That was until 2019, when Ubisoft finally introduced an ingenious system for combating friendly fire. That was reverse friendly fire. Basically, it ensured that any damage inflicted by a traitorous player is actually redirected to the offending griefer themselves, effectively nullifying the joy of attacking your own team entirely. But crucially, reverse friendly fire also had a tolerance threshold in place to ensure that well-meaning players weren't punished. Because of course, in a game like Siege, and if you happen to be a player like me, stray bullets are inevitably gonna fire from time to time, and you might not know which ones are your teammates and which ones aren't. I am not good at Siege. Number 9. Chop down trees, get killed by a tree monster. Don't starve. Cut down too many trees and don't starve, and you'll have to deal with the tree guards. Extremely hostile and powerful boss-level monsters with tons of health, which can make short work of unprepared players. And even if not, they'll keep following you around until you decide to stop and take them on. The longer you're out in the world and chopping down trees, the better your chance of spawning tree guards. And if you survive long enough, you might even face off against a trio of the damn things all at once. If you don't feel prepared to stand your ground and battle the tree guards, and frankly, who would blame you, you can alternatively pacify them by planting a number of trees in the vicinity, causing them to leave you alone. If you do fight and kill the tree guards though, you'll typically get some extremely useful and valuable loot, so if you can manage it, you probably want to try that. Number 8. Automatic life vests prevent you from drowning mules. Death Stranding. Apparently even Hideo Kojima has a line when it comes to letting the player unleash their inner sicko, because he implemented a feature in Death Stranding which would minimize their murderous tendencies. Though you can of course kill the game's cargo thieves, aka mules, anytime you encounter them, you're heavily encouraged to avoid doing so, because dead bodies will eventually turn into the hostile supernatural entities known as BTs who you do not want to deal with. This being a Kojima game, of course you've got a whole host of options for incapacitating mules non-lethally, but you might not stop to think about the wider dangers of, say, knocking out a mule in a body of water. Because doing so would inevitably cause the mule to drown and then later turn into a BT, the game has an inbuilt mechanism to prevent this. Any mule who's knocked out in the water will auto-deploy a flotation device, keeping their head safely out of the drink and ensuring they do in fact remain alive, albeit with a possibly extremely severe concussion. Seems like Kojima really does think of everything. Number 7. This NPC stops you jumping off a bridge. The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. One of the many great joys of video games is the ability to do dangerous things without the fear of suffering any real-life harm. All the same, Nintendo makes family-friendly products and would rather not encourage their younger player base to experiment around with throwing themselves off bridges just to see what happens. And so in The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild, players who attempt to fling themselves off Proxim Bridge in West Necluda will be met by Briggo, a Hylian who patrols the bridge and attempts to protect it from monsters. Upon witnessing you preparing to go for a dive, Briggo will beg you to think about what you're doing. If you keep trying to jump, he'll continue to plead with you to consider the value of your existence and mention the shock he'll suffer at seeing you yeet yourself off to your demise. That is strangely wholesome, and better yet, if you head over to Briggo again after coming down from the ledge, he'll offer to chat with you for a little while. What a nice guy. Number 6. Game over if you kill Ja Ja Binks. Star Wars Episode 1: The Phantom Menace. The video game adaptation of Star Wars Episode 1: The Phantom Menace wasn't great, but it did have one unequivocal positive for fans who were left crestfallen by the movie's less than stellar quality. It lets you kill Ja Ja Binks. Well, it sort of does, but not without a price. LucasArts likely appreciated that older Star Wars fans in particular might have been unable to resist their urge to kill Jar Jar throughout the game, and so doing so will trigger an instant game over, complete with the message, Jar Jar has been killed, as if to slap you on the wrist for doing a bad thing. Now, in fairness, Jar Jar doesn't appear too much throughout the campaign, but given that you're tasked with protecting him during an escort mission of all things, objectively the worst kind of level there is, LucasArts was basically tempting fate by not expecting players to just off Jar Jar themselves. But in the very least, they tried to discourage players from repeatedly murdering Jar Jar by making his mortality a win-lose condition. Probably still try it once though. Number 5. Patching the game to stop players burning themselves to death. Genshin Impact. Shortly after Genshin Impact launched, developer miHoYo released a big 1.1 patch which addressed numerous issues and also revised the game's damage scaling mechanics. One quirk of this patch was that players would take more environmental damage the higher level they were, making an attempt to create a difficulty curve from new players to more experienced ones. Except this created a huge issue for anyone playing as one of the game's many pyro characters, given that their fire attacks would typically set the grass they're standing on aflame. With the new environmental damage model, that meant that higher level pyro characters would take massive amounts of damage, to the extent that players were regularly burning themselves to death. It sounds a bit hilarious until you consider that it fundamentally ruined the pyro playstyle, at least until the developer released a patch a few weeks later to roll back the, in their words, unnecessarily burdensome damage changes. Number 4. Get censored for trying to type profanity. Psychonauts 2. A somewhat cheekier and more lighthearted example now with the great Psychonauts 2. In the level Cruel as Correspondence, players will need to use a typewriter to address a letter, but players being players, of course they couldn't resist but try to write something naughty with it. However, anyone who tried to type a rude word on the letter quickly discovered that they're unable to. Once the game realizes what you're trying to do, it'll replace the offending word-completing letter with a hash. And in case you haven't quite got the memo yet, Mail Clerk Ford will additionally admonish you out loud for your rudeness, saying, "Such language in a high-class establishment like this?" Given that Psychonauts 2 is targeted towards a younger audience, it's easy to appreciate why Double Fine did this. All the same, it predictably wasn't long before a mod was released that removed all the censorship from the typewriter. I mean, options are always a good thing. Go nuts. Number 3. Defile corpses, get a game over. Call of Juarez. Now here's a really weird yet absolutely fascinating one. Western-themed FPS Call of Juarez has one very specific restriction. It prevents you from defiling any of the game's corpses. Once you killed an enemy, you can't keep attacking their corpse. The game will typically have dual protagonists Ray and Billy turn away when you try to shoot a dead body, but even if you find a way to circumvent this, it merely triggers a game over. Given that gaming has an age-old tradition of allowing players to mutilate enemy corpses to their heart's content, it's a weird choice for a relatively violent game to draw the line like this. Except there's actually a narrative reason for it, as later in the game, you'll seemingly kill the villainous Juan Juarez Mendoza, only for him to reveal moments later that he was wearing armor, triggering a second fight. Basically, if the game had let you defile corpses willy-nilly up until this point, then you'd totally be able to shoot Mendoza's corpse, which, he wouldn't really be getting up again for his second phase after all that. There were probably less convoluted ways around this than preventing players from attacking dead bodies for the entire game, but still, at least there is a reason why. Number 2. Kill too many cows, face the Bovine Defense Force. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. It took just days from The Witcher 3's release for players to uncover an exploit which let them quickly accrue crowns, the game's currency, by killing cows in White Orchard Village, looting their hides, triggering a respawn by meditating, and rinse and repeat. But developers set a project Red were on the ball and quickly realized what was going on, prompting them to release a patch a few weeks later, which was intended to catch those milking the exploit with their pants down. Milking. And that it certainly did. The patch changed the game code to ensure that anyone who killed 6 cows or more more in quick succession would end up facing off against a huge level 27 chort, an immensely strong and frankly terrifying cow-like beast. Originally, killing a chort would just spawn more of them continuously as part of the game's Bovine Defense Force initiative, but once Setup Projekt Red realized that strong players could simply keep killing them to farm crowns even faster, they patched it to only spawn a single one of these guys. Number 1, try to kill a monk, get smoked by God. King's Quest II, Romancing the Throne. And finally, we come to King's Quest II, Romancing the Throne, which has a rather hilarious surprise in store for anyone who has some cute ideas about trying to kill off a man of the cloth. Actions throughout the game are performed by simply typing them out, and so when meeting up with monk brother Fragola in the church, some might want to see what would happen if they type kill monk in the text parser. It's okay, I think we'd all do it. Doing so would immediately flash up the message, anyone who would kill a man of the cloth doesn't deserve to play this game. Therefore, we will end it. After this, the player will instantly drop dead, having seemingly been smoked down by God himself, and the game will indeed come to an end. On one hand, you can't blame players for being inquisitive and wanting to test the bounds of the game's options, but on the other, the developers probably avoided a ton of religious protests by including this sneaky countermeasure.